Yeah, to my relatives. Hello, it's Mark Charles. Today is Friday, May 30th. I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee, and I have not had a lot of chances this month to do a second cup of coffee. I think it's been almost 2 weeks since I've done my last one. I was traveling most of last week, and therefore I was gone. I was up in Alaska, if you've been watching on social media, and so I was gone most of last week, and then this week has been fairly busy, so I've been trying to catch up and get things back on track. But anyway, I'm here, and today is Friday, and I'm excited to sit down over my second cup of coffee. And I want to share with you a little bit about some of the stuff I've been reflecting on, but also begin to talk about some of the crises and the chaos that we're experiencing as a nation, and really what we need to be doing about that, how we need to begin both understanding it as well as addressing it. And so I'm excited to have a few moments to chat with you and to talk with you this afternoon. For me, it's almost just after 1 o'clock. I know for many of you across the country, it's still the morning. So if you're in the mountain or Pacific or Alaska or Hawaii time zones, yat e bina. For those of you in the Central and Eastern time zone, yat e. It's Mark Charles in the afternoon here, but I'm still drinking my cup of coffee. I see Shantina is on. Yat A. Thanks for joining from Virginia. And Brian is also on. Yat A. Brian, thanks for joining me. It's good to have you here. I'm grateful for everyone who's able to join me today for the things that we need to discuss. Before I begin, let me do as I always do. And I want to acknowledge I'm speaking to you from Piscataway lands. I live here in what is called Washington, D.C. The Piscataway, they are the host people, the indigenous peoples of these lands. I want to honor them as the hosts of the land where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands and just remind myself and all of us how humbling it is and how humble we must be as we walk, move, breathe, live on the lands where we are living today. Remembering they were not discovered by Europeans. They have been nations and peoples living here long before Columbus got lost at sea. So, yeah, my Piscataway relatives. There's a few things I would love to chat with you about. I'll start with a webinar I did earlier this week. And if you had a chance to watch that, I did a webinar with a group called Churches for Middle East Peace, and they were looking at the issues of land titles, our land possession, and Christian theology, and especially applying some of those thoughts and ideas to the crisis and the war and the challenges that are going on in Gaza right now. And I was very excited to be a part of this panel. It was myself, Ben Norquist, who works for Churches for Middle East Peace, as well as Willie James Jennings, who is a professor at Yale University and their School of Theology, and a well-known author. We actually quoted him numerous times in our book, Unsettling Truth, and have deeply appreciated his work and his thoughts on both theological imagination, but also on some of the stuff he's done in other areas around Christian theology. And so I was very honored and thrilled to have a chance to talk with them and to be on that panel, that webinar. I invite you to watch it. They actually streamed it. You had to register, but then it streamed live on YouTube. So I'm not sure what the registration was for. Because anyone could watch it even live right on YouTube. I didn't know that until after it was over, and I found it on their YouTube channel. So anyway, but it's up there now, and you can go back and watch it. For me, it was a fascinating experience to be there. I appreciated the thoughts that both Ben and Dr. Jennings shared, and I definitely appreciate their input. When I had a chance to share, and I was the third one to kind of go live into the introductions, and we were given some time in the moment and in the beginning to talk about some of our stances and thoughts around land and possession and Christian theology. And I really debated where I wanted to go with that conversation. You know, I started to think about, I could go into the stuff from Unsettling Truths and talk about the doctrine of discovery and that understanding of promised lands and all of that goes into the myth of American exceptionalism. And I did touch on that, and I referenced that in my book, but I said I really want to talk about some of the harder questions that are in the scriptures where we have, and then I went into my narrative where you've heard me talk about this on my second cup of coffee, where I talk about content from my upcoming book, Decolonizing Faith, and especially the content where I discuss the character of God moving in the book of Genesis from that of creator, becoming the God of Abraham, going on to the God of Israel, and ultimately the divine defining itself in the book of First Samuel as king. And the further the character of the divine or of God gets away from creator, and the closer the character of God gets to the understanding of king, the more violent, the more vindictive, the more nationalistic, the more genocidal, and even the more abusive the character of that God becomes. And I've talked about this. I'll share these. I don't have the link right in front of me right now, but I'll share them in the notes later when I post them to the video. I've talked about this on my second cup of coffee, where I talked about Gaza and sort of that history, where basically in Gaza right now we have three players in this war. We have Hamas, we have the nation of Israel, and we have the United States. And Hamas has nationalized Islam. Israel has nationalized Judaism, and we as a nation, the United States of America, have nationalized Christianity. And all three of these religions are Abrahamic religions. And all three of these religions accept the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, as scripture. And these are the books that contain that transformation of the character of the divine of God going from creator to king. And all three of these nations and nation states, Hamas, Israel, and the United States, have used their scriptures and this understanding of God and the divine to justify unthinkable, unspeakable, inhumane actions against people they define as their enemies. And so, again, the point is that if we want to have a discussion about these issues going on in Gaza right now, not only do we have to understand the history of the Middle East and what is going on in that dynamic there, but we have to understand the history of these three religions and look closely at how they paint the character of God in their scriptures. And one of the points I was making is, as I talked about how I'm writing this book from in the voice of and from the context of, I am the grandson of boarding school survivors. My grandparents were taken from their homes and put into military-style boarding schools. They were punished for speaking their languages and punished for practicing their cultures. And they were compelled to accept this faith, to accept the Christian version of a creation story, to convert to Christianity, to leave the traditional Navajo religion and our understanding of faith and spirituality. And they were forced to assimilate, and they were colonized through the acceptance of that faith. And I was feeling especially emotional about this because last week when I was in Alaska, I had a chance to visit the Native Alaska Heritage Center, where they have on displays different parts of Alaska Natives' history and the stories of the people who've been living there, their cultures, and so on. And one of the things they had just opened recently, since last time I was there, a display on the history of boarding schools in Alaska. And they had a dynamic digital map. This was a table that was up, but it was a computer screen, and you could move things around and click on things and so on. They had this map on there, which is a map of Alaska, right? And Alaska was, quote unquote, discovered by Russia. And then that right of discovery was sold to the United States of America. So you have one colonial nation discovering these lands and disregarding the agency and the sovereignty of the native nations and peoples who were living there, and then selling the right to those lands and including the people who were on there, to the United States of America. So you have one colonial nation engaging in economic transaction with another colonial nation, and both nations are completely disregarding the agency, the humanity, the sovereignty of the native peoples and native nations who were already living there, both prior to Russia's discovery and after the United States of America's purchase. And then they had on this map these circles where they basically showed the map of Alaska to Christian denominations, and they claimed these areas were the areas they were going to colonize and assimilate and set up boarding schools and educate and assimilate the native peoples who were living in those areas. Literally claim those lands for these denominations and churches. It makes your blood boil. Literally. To see the blatant disregard for the humanity and agency of the native peoples who were living there and who still do live there. And so I was feeling all of this emotion very strongly as I was going into this discussion on Gaza. And I was making one of the points I always make, which is, right, that the last nation that represents a voice of reason in the dialogue, in the debate, in the conflict going on in Gaza is the United States of America, right? To think that this nation can send representatives, either religious or political, to that region and think we're the voice of reason in this conflict is absurd. Complete, not only disregarding our own history, but not even acknowledging the fact that we haven't even dealt with that history. We haven't even wrestled through what we've done and what we continue to perpetuate. Not in the distant past, today. Today. And so I was feeling very strongly all of these emotions as I was presenting. Was concerned that my emotion might have obstructed or caused some confusion with the message I was trying to convey. I talked to some people who watched it, as well as some people who have viewed it since then, and was told that, yeah, the emotion I did show was appropriate, but and it even enhanced on what I was trying to say. But at the end of that webinar, I felt very emotionally spent. I felt very, very tired and spent, just drained emotionally. And right, I think part of it was I had just come from Alaska and I had been wrestling with some of these thoughts around boarding schools and talking about my own grandparents and their story and history with the church, and then talking very honestly about some of my questions regarding the Christian faith and the scriptures of the Bible. And then addressing a group of people who has not dealt with its own history, and they are going to the Middle East to try and present a solution or work for a solution there. And again, it's just like, yeah, this is the problem, is we are not the voice of reason. However good our intentions may or may not be, we are not the voice of reason in that conflict, because we haven't even dealt through our own crap, let alone we're going to help someone else figure out their same crap, which is even thousands of years older than ours. And so I was feeling very, I had a lot of emotion as I was going through this time and thinking about these things. And then I also realized Um, because I took a few hours of that session to just kind of think through why I was feeling so spent about that. And I also realized I was feeling very exhausted because not only has our nation now dealt with this history, but we've been taking some massively huge steps backwards. And one of the things I've appreciated about the last 4 or 5 months of our nation's history since Donald Trump has taken his oath of office and caused chaos from the White House is that Democrats are willing to acknowledge, okay, we have a problem, right? Because when Biden or when anyone else from the Democratic Party is in power, they're like, oh, we have no problems. We're doing great, right? We just elected our first Black president. We just have this other great elder who's in place now, and we're working on these things. And it's like, no, you don't understand. And you've heard me talk before about how the Democrats are implicitly racist and sexist and white supremacists, and the Republicans are explicitly racist and sexist and white supremacists. Joe Biden was every bit the white Christian nationalist that Donald Trump is. There's very little difference between the two, except in kind of the tone of their voice. And so it's been refreshing for Democrats to acknowledge, okay, we have a problem. The problem is Democrats think we have a partisan problem instead of a foundational bipartisan problem. But the other challenge is the challenge between the implicit and the explicit is the implicit is at least beginning to take some steps towards acknowledging, okay, we might have a deeper problem here, even though if it can't really deal with it or is not willing to deal with it yet, there is a little bit of that acknowledgement. Whereas the explicit is like, yeah, we saw that, we experienced that, we don't want to go that direction. We want to go this other direction very intentionally. And they say things, the Republicans say things out loud, Democrats would never say out loud. They might believe and might feel, but at least they don't say it out loud. The Republicans will say it out loud. Donald Trump and his MAGA people absolutely will say these things out loud. And they're fighting against diversity, equity, inclusion. They're causing literal chaos in the country. And some of it is trivial, right? I'll share a few links here, a few articles with you. This is a story in the AP where Donald Trump pardoned some reality TV stars for tax evasion, right? That's trivial. It's not good, but it's trivial. We have his whole rhetoric about the war in Ukraine. And this is an article from The Hill where, right, for a long time, Donald Trump was cozying up to Vladimir Putin and was painting Zelensky as the aggressor and the person, the country and the nation and the leader in the wrong, and even claiming that they had attacked Russia and caused this war. And now, when Trump is not responding, or when Putin is not responding the way Trump wants him to respond and is not respecting him or listening to him or is not going along with what he's presenting, now he's like, okay, now I'm going to have now Putin to become the enemy and I have to now paint him bad. And so now he's talking bad about Putin. That's a bit more major. It's funny to see how, right, Donald Trump doesn't have a policy. He doesn't have foreign policy. He just wants retribution against whoever was the last person to make him the most angry or to feel the most insulted. That's what his policy is I'm just going to go after whoever was the last person to dismiss me or to not take me seriously or to ignore me or avoid me or insult me or whatever else hurts his ego. And that's his policy. He doesn't have a long-term vision for peace or for movement or for economic. It's literally whatever comes to his mind, whatever he's feeling and experiencing right at that moment. Now, unfortunately, the voices around Donald Trump have policy goals and agendas that are not as childlike as Donald's are. And they're trying to enact some fairly substantial change in the country. And one of these things is regarding race. And we're seeing this play out in diversity, equity, and inclusion attacks. We're seeing this play out in migration and policies towards migrants. We're seeing this play out in the way deportations are happening and the court cases that are happening. We're seeing this play out in what Donald Trump is doing with South Africa right now, where in South Africa, he is creating what has been termed fake refugees of white Afrikaners who need to be rescued from the genocide in South Africa, is what he's calling it. And we're shutting the doors to almost every other migrant who's seeking protection or safety or a better life. And yet we're opening the door for white, not even refugees, for white people to come in and claiming that they're the true victims of the global community and need to be brought and protected and sanctuaried here in the United States of America. And we're seeing this play out, right, in even the way that Donald Trump interacts with the president of South Africa, where he treats him like a child, accuses him of racism and genocide, and shows pictures, not even of South Africa, of the Congo. And uses fake news and fake photos and fake intelligence blatantly to accuse him on a global stage of racism and genocide. And this is what's really troubling, is this is where we see the explicit racism, sexism, white supremacy coming out. This is where we see these very direct attacks. We see how and so these are these are the things where how do we deal with this, right? I've told people this privately, and I'm beginning to talk about it more publicly. It feels like we're living back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. And in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, right, our nation had just won World War II. We were coming out of the Great Depression, had won a global conflict. We're seen as heroes around the world. and had millions of soldiers coming home, had factories that were gearing up to build this new consumer economy. And in many ways, white people in this country were thriving. A few months ago, I spoke about a book that I read called The Psychology of Money. And the book is a good read. I encourage you to read it. But I encourage you to read it. But it ends with a kind of a postscript that talks about this era after the Second World War, which he attributes that era to some of the rise of Trumpism. And I go in depth into it in this YouTube video. I just put the link in there. And I'm sorry, I saw the connection got frozen there for a moment. There's something going on with the internet in our neighborhood, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I saw it was frozen for a moment. So I apologize for that. Hopefully it will stay consistent now. I'll keep watching it. Let me know if it drops again. Yeah, he talks about how right after World War II, the government was very concerned about us going back into a recession. And they made the very quick, intentional choice to hold interest rates steady and keep them very low to ensure credit for people and to allow borrowing to happen, right? Interest rates, our interest paid was tax deductible. We had new technologies, color TVs and better cars, and houses and home ownership was rising, and wages, especially for the lower 20%, was rising about the same rate as wages for the top 5% were rising, right? There was this kind of leveling of the playing field where, yes, the poor people were driving Chevys and the rich people were driving Cadillacs, but they were still both driving GM-made, American-made cars. They were living in houses because of credit. They could all have washing machines and a television in their house, and so on and so forth. And they were all watching the same 3 channels. And there was this general sense that there was this level of equality that was existing and being created within white America. Right? Because that very much was not the case for people of color. If you Google racial tensions in the 1940s and the 1950s, it's very clear that there were a lot of racial tension throughout that era. And I'm just going to show you a screenshot of a few of the things that I was looking at. But right, if you Google racial tension in the 1940s, let me go back here. We had things like Jim Crow laws, we had segregation in the military, we had discriminatory employment practices, we had housing segregation. We also had things like discrimination in education. We had racial violence and lynching. We had white primaries. We had racial discrimination in northern cities. Japanese internment, right? We had Mexican Americans living in ghettos and things like that, right? We had this. It was very clear our nation was not equal in regards to race. The 1950s were no better, right? I Googled this, and this is the AI overview that it gave me, and I looked into some of these. The links for some of these, and of course these are all true. We had more segregation, discrimination in the 1950s and 60s. We had resistance to things like Brown versus Board of Education. Rosa Parks is the boycott, but she was getting arrested, right? She was getting arrested for not giving her seat to a white person in a bus, right? We have the Little Rock crisis. We have other racial violence and other things going on. There's a lot of things that are happening racially. Things are not going well, and they are reaching a boiling point in our country. Yes, people of color were beginning to work towards and to fight for equal rights, but there was a very, very strong resistance from white America to granting those things and to allowing that equality to really take hold. And so while there was this growing sense of community and equality and a leveling of the playing fields for white America, that absolutely did not extend to communities of color. And if we're honest, even to women. And sometimes I feel like that's the world Trump wants to go back to. And that's where MAGA wants to go back to. And that's where white evangelicals want to go back to. They want to go back to the era where they're living in their white communities, feeling on par and equal with their white contemporaries and peers, where they're thriving and they're enjoying these things off of the oppression of people of color. They're dividing up our communities and our traditional lands of, oh, we'll go here and show charity to these groups of people. We'll help these people assimilate to us. We'll teach these people how to speak English. We'll get these people to give up their savage ways and come back to our ways. And I feel like that's the world Trump is trying to recreate. As he is willing more and more frequently, and as the people around him are compelling him and encouraging him and helping him to go back to this way of thinking and this way of life, that they are trying to go back into this era of 1940s and 50s where there's a prosperous and a growing economy. There's this sense of we've done everything. We've won a war and we're the heroes of the globe and we've done all these things. And white people are enjoying the fruits of that over and above the expense and the oppression and the marginalization of people of color and of other marginalized communities. And yeah, this is the 1940s, 50s, and 60s were not a golden era for the United States. And they weren't even that's the whole understanding behind a perpetration-induced traumatic stress. Is you can't create crisis. You can't create that kind of crisis without hurting yourself. And so my message to Trump, my message to our country is you don't want to go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s. You don't. This nation was not thriving at that point. We were not. When you have segregation, discrimination, oppression, dehumanization, that is not a good era for any society, period. And we are fooling ourselves if we're looking back at the era as a nation and saying, oh, that's what we want again. White people are fooling themselves if they're thinking that's what they want again. And that's what's so troubling about that, what Trump is doing with the white refugees from South Africa. I'm going to share a link from Democracy Now! And there is a guest that she's interviewing on Democracy Now! His name is Adil Zulu. He appears around the 8 minute, 30-second mark. I encourage you especially to listen to his segment. He is laying out some really profound understandings and ideas in that interview. And the whole interview, the whole segment demonstrates, I think, again, this is what I think again, I struggle to say Donald Trump because he is such a child. I don't feel like he understands what he's doing. He's just trying to make people happy and to get people to like him. And the people he wants to like him are racist, sexist, and white supremacists. And he's willing to do whatever because he wants the attention. But what the White House and what Donald is leading and what our white majority Congress is willing to go along with is going back to this era. And there's a fear, I think, among both conservatives and liberals, right? This is why my campaign in 2020 failed. It's because our nation doesn't know what to do with our history. We did some horrible, horrific, terrible things. And because we won things like the Civil War, we still view people like Abraham Lincoln, who was a blatant, unapologetic, self-proclaimed white supremacist and one of the most genocidal presidents in our nation's history, and we still view him nationally, globally, he's still seen as a hero. Because we've never confronted and acknowledged and owned our incredibly violent and racist history as a nation. And we still work very, very hard to control that narrative. And what's happened in South Africa is the white minority is no longer in power, and they're losing a lot of their privilege, which is not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing. If you're benefiting from the lie of white supremacy and you begin to lose some of that privilege, that's not a bad thing. That's not unjust. But the narrative they're creating is, no, we're victims and we're being mistreated and we need refugee status. I encourage you to watch that video. It's a fascinating interview. So what do we do? In chapter 11 of my book on Selling Truths, we talk about what I call the trauma of white America, a multi-generational communal manifestation of a perpetration-induced traumatic stress. And I literally interact with white people as another group of traumatized people. In most racial dialogues in the United States, we put white people in the role either of racist or fragile. Neither one of those are helpful. If white people are racist, then they have no part in the dialogue. If they're fragile, we have to smooth everything over and make everything look good and easy. By understanding they're traumatized by the injustices they're standing on, I find that helps me keep not only the injustices in mind, but also their humanity in mind. And it helps me to engage with that demographic, that community, as fellow humans. If we want to walk in beauty, we have to start by acknowledging the humanity of everybody, including those who oppose us. We have to work very hard not to become the things we're fighting against. Whether that's in our relationships with the people we live around, or whether that's in our understanding of the world, right? Western culture defined nature. The definition for nature is things that are separate from humans and human creations. Western culture, Western society does not see itself as part of the natural world, which explains, go ahead, Google it. Google nature, the definition of nature. You'll read the definition. Western society does not view itself as part of the natural world, which explains why we're in an environmental crisis, why colonization is such a massive problem throughout all of Western culture. Which is why right-leaning politics wants to exploit the environment and left-leaning politics wants to preserve it and not touch it, because neither one of them believe we need these things for our continued not only existence, but thriving. This is why the billionaires are building rockets and trying to colonize Mars. It's like, well, we've destroyed this place. We're going to go somewhere else. It's why non-Indigenous peoples, when someone like Trump gets elected into office, are so quick to think, we'll just leave and migrate to move to another country. A Native person, we don't think that way. I can guarantee you Trump is not going to scare me away from these lands. I'm indigenous to these lands. I'm not going to go somewhere else. But that's the mindset, because we view ourselves, Western culture has this colonial mindset that views itself as separate from the natural world and from its environment. And so to walk in beauty, we need to do several things. So first, we need to understand and recognize we are a part of this natural world. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. The way I remind myself about that on a regular basis is I watch the sunrise. Watching the sunrise on a regular basis, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, now decade after decade, reminds me I am a part of the food chain. I am a part of the natural order of things. I am existing within this natural world. It gives me an incredible relationship to the world around me as well as to the creator of this place. You don't have to watch the sunrise. If that happens too early or that's not your thing, find some other way to connect yourself with nature. And second, we need to find a way to keep at the forefront of our mind that everybody on this earth, including those who act as our opponents and even our enemies, are human. And we need to keep our humanity and everybody's humanity at the forefront of our understanding of who we are. These are not easy things to do. We live in a world that is trying to convince us we're not a part of the natural world. Our culture is telling us that every day. A linear perception of time tries to convince us we're in control of things. Insurance tries to convince us we're not subject to the laws of nature and the catastrophes of our world. We're somehow protected from them. Processed foods trick us into thinking we're eating something that we're not. We have to remember we are a part of this natural world, and we need to connect to that natural world on a regular basis. And every morning that we see the sunrise, every morning we see the sun come up. Every morning we're aware it has risen again, even if we can't see it because it's behind the clouds, or we can't feel it because it's cold outside. Every morning when we know the sun has risen again, we need to remember this is another opportunity, another chance, another day to build a relationship and to walk in beauty with our neighbors, our family, and even to try to work out the conflicts with the people who oppose us. Another day. And that's the starting point. It's not the ending point. It's the starting point. One of the reasons I love drinking coffee is I've traveled all over the world. I've met leaders and just normal people like myself all over the globe. It never ceases to amaze me how many people drink coffee. And I found when I bring coffee with me, I can gift it to elders I meet, to leaders I meet. And I can gift them coffee and they will be able to accept and receive that as something that's honoring. I find coffee is one way I can connect with people in almost every country I've traveled to, in almost any restaurant I'm sitting in almost any city I go to. I can usually find a way to connect with somebody over a cup of coffee. Which is exactly what I'm doing with you. So, my relatives, these are my thoughts. Donald, the White House, our white majority Congress are causing chaos and crisis right now. It's not a partisan problem. It's a bipartisan foundational level problem. And we need to resist it. We need to even confront it. But we need to do it in a way that acknowledges we're a part of this world and acknowledges that we are all human and need to be working towards solutions communally. So those are my thoughts. We're ending the month of May and going into June. And in the month of June, I have some travel coming up. I just am scheduling this and putting the final dates together right now, but I'm going to be traveling to New Mexico, probably the 4th week of June. Well, not the 3rd week of June. I think I'm hoping to do something in Gallup, New Mexico on June 28th. For my Common Memory Tour. I'm also in the middle of planning an event in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't have a date for that yet, but I am working so hard to counter the narrative coming out of our government and out of our churches by talking about the roots of our problems. One of the speeches I'm giving is called Christian Nationalism, Creation Stories, and Corn, looking at how the doctrine of discovery has distorted our understandings of politics, of faith, and of our health. And what can we begin to do to decolonize those worldviews and decolonize those understandings so we can be healthier and understand a more healthy level of spirituality and of a global politics. And so if you're interested in that and you have a building or a group near where you are that would like to host one of these talks for my Common Memory Tour, please reach out to me. I'm fundraising for this, so the expenses and even honorariums that I would make from these things are not at the forefront of my mind for the people who are scheduling me. I'm trying to do some fundraising for this so that we can get this talk out in front of as many audiences and as many people as absolutely possible. And I invite you and encourage you, if you would like to have me come speak in your community, please reach out to me and let me know, and we can work to try and make that happen. I also invite you to look at my Patreon. Patreon is one of the subscription websites I use to keep my voice independent. I do work very hard not to monetize my voice on my social media, even though like YouTube does show ads on my videos. I don't get any money for those ads, and I do that intentionally because I don't want advertisers to have any influence over what I do and do not say. And so I work very hard to keep my voice independent. Patreon is one of the places where people can subscribe to me, and they get different tiers and different levels of good dialogue we have there. And it's one of the ways that you can help me keep my voice as independent as possible. And then third, I'm still promoting the book that I wrote with my good friend Sung-Chan Ra on selling truths. And you can buy both signed copies as well as a book study special from my website. And I'm working very hard to continue to get word about this book out. It will help you understand a lot of what's going on at a foundational level of our nation right now, and why we struggle with acknowledging our history and really what we've done and who we are as a nation. Anyway, my relatives, I appreciate all of you. Thank you for joining me for my second cup of coffee. I hope your cup of coffee is as good as mine is. And walk in beauty. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Shahat and go on that.